Do you remember years ago a movie came out called Mahogany, and in the movie Diana Ross was the star of the movie, and she was a model slash fashion designer. And in the movie there was a photographer named Sean, and he was this fashion photographer. And at his home in the movie, he had a room where he kept pictures that only were for him, private pictures, hard to look at photographs. Now, in my own life, I have a box of hard to look at photographs. Let me share these with you. My name is Rob Skeoch. I'm a career photographer, and I've been shooting professionally for over 45 years, and I've been shooting film for over 50 years. Maybe some of these techniques that I've learned as a photographer shooting for Major League Baseball and the NFL, getting published by magazines like Sports Illustrated and even National Geographic, maybe some of these tips will be useful to you as you want to learn about film photography. So I'm going to give a bit of a warning with this one. If you are a family member of mine and you heard Rob's got this YouTube channel, we should check out Rob's YouTube channel. This is not the episode that you want to start with. There's going to be some photos in here that are hard to look at if you're a family member. So if you're one of my family members, and I don't know how much of my videos you watch, I would pick a different one. Now, if you're not a family member, I think you're going to find this interesting. Now, when you do YouTube, a lot of it is around gear. There's lots of gear reviews. I talk about gear a bit. In my own world, though, I don't really talk about gear to myself that much. It's not all about gear. It's mostly about photographs. And when you do YouTube, people are always like, oh, you talk about gear, but you never show any photos. So I'm going to show some photos today. But the thing is, I'm going to try to kind of show you my headspace, my thought process with some of the gear as well. And I think the gear that I used on this project became the photographer that I am now, and the gear decisions that I have now are a direct result of this photography that I did in this project. So let's jump right in and let me introduce you to my dad. So I owned a studio that was a building. It was a renovated house, and that's where my studio was, and I went there every day for work. Now, my dad moved into the studio when he sold his house because I could check up on him every day, and it was a renovated house, so it had a kitchen with dishwashers, and it had bedrooms and everything you would want in a house except the ability to do laundry, because the laundry room was the darkroom. So anyways, my dad moved into the studio. And in November one year, my dad got diagnosed with leukemia. So that's when this story kind of starts, in November. And I was with my dad. We went to the cancer clinic, and he was getting chemo, and there was a poster on the wall. We're kind of in the waiting room, and there's a poster on the wall. And the poster says that they're looking for cancer survivors to talk and give lectures to other cancer survivors to tell them how their journey went. And I said to my dad, like, hey, you like to talk in front of a group. This might be something you'd be interested in. And he thought, yeah, that would be true. So we're just, we're sitting there in the waiting room. And I said, Dad, to go with this talk that you're going to do, I could take some photos, and then you could do like a slideshow of your experience. And this is how this project started. So my dad had leukemia, and I started photographing him for a presentation that he was going to do talking about cancer survivors down the road. So, and he lived at my studio. So the project started off a little bit slow. I'm going to talk for a second about the camera because it's important to where I am now. It's not important for these photographs what camera they were taken with, but it's important to where I am now. So at my studio, I had maybe 3 or 4 cameras that I could load up with film and kind of leave around and take photos with them. So I worked at Sony, and Sony had come out with the Sony M-mount, which is really the old Minolta mount. Now, Sony never produced a film camera, and I wanted to shoot this project on film. So I bought a Minolta Maxim, kind of like the top of the line Minolta Maxim from, used from their era, because it would use the Sony lenses that I had from work. So that was one camera that I had. And then I also had a Pentax 645, that was the autofocus version. That was a good camera to have. I used that. And I had a Leica M6 and I had a Leica CL. So those were, and I had an F6. I had a Nikon F6. I only had 1 or 2 lenses, and they were manual focus lenses. But I did have a Nikon F6. So anyways, my dad is starting this chemo program, and we're at the studio and we're kind of back at the hospitals, and you get an idea, like he's really having a hard time dealing with the whole thing. It's a tough thing to deal with. We would go to the cancer clinic. Everything took a long time. They did a great job, but everything took a long time. Now, because it was my dad, I never needed permission to photograph in the clinic, which as a news photographer, it would have been difficult to photograph in the clinic. But they didn't care because it was I was taking a family member picture. And I don't think I was allowed to show pictures of other people unless they were medical staff, something like that. I can't remember. So, you know, we would pack up and we would go to the clinic, and a lot of our days were involved with getting ready to go to the clinic, going to the clinic, waiting to come. We'd come back from the clinic, and a lot of waiting, and there was a lot of waiting. And I would try to take some photographs, and mostly it was of things either at the clinic or at my studio. Now, photographically, everything was shot black and white film. And I had decided to work with an editor early in this project, right at the start of this project. So I approached an editor friend, and the plan was on Mondays we would process film from the last week, make contacts, and I would physically mail them to the editor, black and white contacts. And then the two of us would talk about the contacts, and I would make work prints. And then on the following Monday, I would send out the new contacts, and I would send out the work prints. And there were hundreds of work prints in the end. So because of this style of photography, shooting, developing, making contacts, conversations, so I was never too far behind. There was never a big pile of backed up work in this. If I shot something today, on the Monday of the next week, we would process it and ship contacts off. And probably 2 weeks from when it was photographed, it was a work print. So that's kind of how we kept up on the work. And there were some photographs after looking at the work prints that you just knew, yeah, this is going to be an important picture. So I would make gallery prints. So a work print is kind of like a straight print. You don't adjust the contrast, because when you're printing the good print, it's good to know, hey, this one's a little flat, or this one's a little this or that, this one's a little that. Too contrasty, too flat. You don't tend to burn in a work print, for instance, or do any burn and dodge. It's just a work print. Make sure the picture's sharp and give you an idea compared to the rest of the project how flat the negs are. And then you would make good prints, which I made on Ilford's fiber-based paper. So 11 by 14 prints I'm going to call them gallery prints, although they were never shown in the gallery. So there's contacts, work prints, gallery prints. And I started the shoot, as I said, with a Minolta, and early in the project, the Minolta fell off of a low table and just cracked, like demolished, shattered. I've never had a camera shatter from such a small fall. I mean, you're not supposed to drop your cameras, but it happens. And anyway, this one was done. So then I thought, well, I guess this Minolta idea. Now, you might have had a Minolta Maxim, and you might have had, different mileage than me. But I only owned one. It was like the 9 or the 9000 or the Super 9 or whatever it was called. It was the highest value, highest level Minolta Maxim. And it just didn't hold up for me. We dropped it once and it was done. So that was the end of the Minolta. And then I also, as I mentioned, I had the Leica CL. Now you might love the CL. You might have a CL and you just love it. And I had the CL as a backup to the M6. So I had the M6, and if I was going on a trip, the CL was a small camera, like the size of a deck of cards. You could just take a backup camera. Now you're in business with a backup camera if your M6 fails. So now in this project, I'm shooting with the CL, and it's just not cutting it for me. It's limited to what lenses it's got frame lines for. It's too different anyways. So I decided that although a nice backup, I was going to get rid of the CL. So now I've gotten rid of the Minolta and I've gotten rid of the CL. So that's kind of where this project is going. Now my dad was living at the studio, and this is November when he got diagnosed. And then by December, he'd moved into my sister's house, and he was there for a few weeks, but for whatever reason, it didn't really work out. So by January, he has now moved to my residence where my wife and I live, and my children are all either adults moved out or at university. So it's just my wife and I and my dad, and we're the main caregivers. So if you know much about leukemia, it's got some ups and downs. You're short of energy for sure. But after a few doses of the treatment, he started to feel pretty good. And now it's, he's at our house in January, February, early March. He's starting to feel pretty good. So I thought, hey, why don't we do a day trip to the cottage? There's been a property on the lake in our family for 40 years. It was one of his favorite places. Why don't we go there? And so we packed up on a day trip and we went to the cottage. It was a wonderful place for him to be and a wonderful place for him and I to go to. I actually let him drive. He hadn't driven since he got diagnosed, but he recovered. He was doing pretty good. And so we went to the cottage, and once we got out of town and away from traffic, I let him drive, and we went to the cottage, and it was snow covered and the ice was there, and it was a wonderful time. And I thought this picture of my dad at the cottage, really, it was one of my favorite experiences from this time period. Now, time marches on, and my dad started to drop a bit of weight, and this is an interesting photo. I'll tell you something. I have a friend, a professional photographer. We shot together for years when we did sports. When I shot pro sports, we traveled together, so I've known him for years and years. And he had a couple of lenses he lent me. Now, lenses are funny, and cameras are funny. You use them a lot, and then you go through periods where you don't use them that much. And especially if you have like a rangefinder, you might shoot with it every day, and then you put it down and you don't pick it up for 6 months because it's not suitable for what you're working on at the time. Now, so anyways, he had some Leica gear, and he had some amazing lenses. He had a 21-1.4 and a 24-1.4. And so he lent me those for a period of time just to try them out. And this shot was with, I think, the 24-1.4. Might have been the 21. I don't exactly remember. And this next shot as well. So those were with a borrowed lens just for, those who are keeping score on that kind of thing. And as I mentioned, time marches on, and my dad is still feeling pretty good. And we returned to the lake property kind of end of May, early June maybe, and we kind of, it was starting to get ready for summer, and we hadn't been there since the March date, and he just was kind of enjoying his last trip to the lake cottage. So these couple of shots kind of show you what's up with that, and the experience at the lake. Now, one thing that you have access to when you're subject that lives in your house is you can take photos whenever you want. And I literally had cameras kind of here and there laying around. I would have one, at a table, I'd have one in his room, I'd have one on the stairs. And as the primary caregiver, maybe we're going up the stairs, I'd help him up the stairs, and then I'd grab the camera and I'd shoot like 3 frames, and then I'd be back helping him up the stairs. So you're kind of the caregiver, photographer, helper guy. And, our lives really rotated around chemo and going to the cancer clinics and, waiting to come back. That's kind of what, how things were working out. Now, so we're at the cottage in early June, and things have kind of taken a turn for the worse by, say, Father's Day. And the priest came to give him his last rites. And I've shown these pictures to some friends like Eli Reed, a great Magnum photographer, some other people. And, some people think, this picture is not that important, this one of the last rites. But I think if you're a person who believes in that, then this picture should stay in the project. And there's pictures, I'm showing, I think, 39 photos here. Would you ever show 39 photos? I'll talk about that in a second. So my dad's health is starting to deteriorate, and it's becoming a little bit rougher. We're kind of, as I said, now mid-June, and he's now kind of in the bedridden stage, and he's sleeping a lot of the time, and there's his life he's got access to my whole house, but his life is now becoming in this bedroom. He just can't really make it up and down the stairs that easily. So we're bringing the food up and we're looking after him in the bedroom more. This becomes your life. Your world seems to become smaller and smaller as you lose your abilities to move. And the family was supportive. My siblings would come in and they would help with what they could do. They weren't across the street. They were, from other towns, so it was always a bit of a trip for them. But they would come in and help, and there were conversations and things like that, and we were trying to work through this. And I would continue to take photographs. And I think anyone who has dealt with this knows there's pain. And this particular shot, again, it's not about the camera, but in his room, I had the Pentax 645, which was that weird autofocus version, and I had a 75mm lens, 2.8, fastest lens that I had. And I would grab this shot, I'd like literally 2 frames, and then go back to looking after Dad. And this was probably minimal focus. Like, this is probably as close as I can get with that lens and take a photo. And this day was not about taking photos. This day was about, like a lot of the days, getting through it. But you'd grab the camera for a frame here and there and, get what you could. You were always getting what you could. And, the disease progressed on, and the disease, just carried on. And my dad's life in this bedroom upstairs, that became kind of his life. And there was pain, and there was suffering, and it was tough to take photographs. And I didn't dwell on it. I just took the photographs and kind of moved on. Now let me just kind of conclude any of the thought on gear. Again, this project was not about the gear, but I'm just gonna, for those who are keeping score, let me just wrap up. Started off with Minolta, it died. Started off with the Nikon F6. The Nikon F6 was the greatest film camera that Nikon ever made. It came out too late. We'd already started switching to digital, but I had an F6. It was too heavy. I had a motor drive on it. It was too heavy. It was amazing to use with autofocus lenses. It was a little tough to focus with manual focus lenses. So in the end, after working on this job, this project with that camera, I thought, you know what, this is not what I'm going to use going forward. So I sold the F6 and I went back to the Nikon F3, which I think is easier to focus with manual lenses, in my view. So I started off with an M6, Leica M6, and a Leica CL. By the early part of this project, I'd realized the CL is just a backup and it's not really going to work for me at a higher level. Got rid of that. The M6 died, had to go in for service. I didn't have a big window of time, so I couldn't wait for it to be fixed. I ended up, again, buying an MP, which I think I bought the wrong one. I should have bought a black with a 58 viewfinder. I bought a chrome with a 72. So that probably wasn't the perfect answer. And then if it was bright out, I would shoot with the Pentax 645 outdoors, or in some of the brighter rooms, you could get away with it. So that kind of gives you an idea. Going forward, after this project, I learned so much from this project about really, like, this was a project that, in a way, a career changing, where you've really defined how to do this. Like, this took a long time, but you had time. You had a lot of time. And everyone's always trying to talk about these photojournalism projects and, fly on the wall and all these other lies. And I had time to do this one, and I really kind of integrated my thoughts and really matured what I was thinking about photography over the course of this project. So it was a career-changing project. Not that the work became so famous that it changed my career, but it redefined who I was as a photographer. Can you shoot in these tough situations? What do you, when you get into a tough situation, when the cards are dealt, how are you going to play the game? And I learned a lot. I learned a lot from doing this. Would I want someone else to go through it? We don't really get a choice. So if you have to go through it, do the best you can. That's all you can do. And learn the best you can. And it's, my heart goes out to you. It's tough to do, but do the best you can. So things are starting to deteriorate a bit now. It's mid-June, it's Father's Day, and my siblings are in town visiting during Father's Day, kind of on the Saturday. And my dad, he's going to have treatment starting on Monday or Tuesday again. And he says, you know what, I'm done with the treatment. I can't do it. I'm done. I'm done with the treatment. So that became a conversation starter, let's say. And we kind of rallied around, like, what's going on? What are you thinking? And so he was done. So that was the Saturday. And I guess people come to the point where this is the point that they can get to. And the next day was Sunday, and I had to go to work. So I'm helping my dad out of bed, and he just kind of collapses, and he's not hurt. He's just on the floor, and I can't get him up. I can't lift him, and I've got to go to work. So we call for help. We call the fire department. Ends up coming, and so we relocate him from his bedroom upstairs, and now he is relocated into a medical bed in the dining room. So this is kind of on the Sunday. He's now in the dining room, and it wasn't very long after that until my father passed. So again, he's laying there, kind of, I guess let's call it in state, and my siblings arrive, and it's a tough day in your life, and yeah. So that's a tough day, and this is kind of like the I call it the black men in the suits, and I didn't mind shooting it at a longer exposure, just because I didn't mind the blur. Didn't matter who they were, they're just people. They're people who do this. And then there's some, you have like the funeral parlor and the experience there, and then at the church I'm next to my brother, and I guess because you're a family member, you get to travel behind the hearse, and that's my project. So it started in November, and it was done. Dad had passed by Father's Day, just after Father's Day, and this was this documentary that I worked on. Some of the photos are a little tough to look at. For me, looking back at them, some are tough to look at, but I kind of have dealt with it over the time as well. So it's a project. Now, would I recommend you do a project like this? I don't know. You have to look at yourself and say, do I want to do this? Like, not every photo is puppies and sunsets. Sometimes they're harder photos, tough to look at. And I don't show these photos to anyone. So my wife has seen them. She would be the only family member. My siblings have not seen them. They've seen like 1 or 2 or 3 of the portraits, the nice picture at the cottage and things like that. They've seen that, but they haven't seen the whole package. And so now you've got these photos of this experience. What are you going to do with them? And as I mentioned, I showed them to some people. Eli Reed, he thought I should try to do this or that with them. Good ideas. And I had a friend at the Globe and Mail. He was the head of photography, and Mo. And I went and I showed Mo these photos, and we discussed it. Like, what could you do with them? Did I want, like, we could publish them in the Globe and Mail? And I thought that'd be hard on my siblings. I don't think I could do it. There's nothing for me to be gained by getting a couple of page spread in the Globe and Mail about dying at home, or the effects of leukemia, or living with leukemia, or that. I mean, as a photographer, yeah, it'd be interesting to have them in the Globe and Mail, but I didn't need the money, and I didn't need the hassle, or I didn't need to put my siblings through the stress of that. So in the end, I didn't get them published by the Globe and Mail. Now, the Canadian news photographers, they had on their website a few years back, they would publish photo stories that their members had taken, and so they published it as a slideshow, like a video slideshow, and that was all I needed, really. That was, I'm not even sure if they're still up, but they published them there, and I'd shown them to people who I felt should see them, who I wanted to see them, and that was kind of the project. So I really haven't shown them to very many people. Now, there were a couple of images where I entered them in juried art shows. Now juried art shows are a funny thing. I generally don't enter photography shows, for photography competitions. I enter competitions like open juried art shows. So this would be like the Canadian Art Society or the Ontario Art Society. And as a photographer, it's interesting to be with other people who are considered artists who are not photographers. So I'm going to sort of say my perspective on that, and you might disagree. You might think, oh no, we've come further, but I'm just saying what my thoughts are. So, for instance, I entered some photos in the Ontario or Canadian, I can't remember, Art Society annual juried show. Now, in a show like this, say there's 100 people, say maybe there's 500 people, 500 entries, and they pick 100 and they do a show at a gallery. You know, Art Society juried show. It's kind of a big deal in the art world. So in this little fictitious example, let's say there's 100 pieces selected for the show. So what are they? Well, one of them is going to be like fabric art. There's going to be one fabric art, and there's going to be maybe something made of glass, and there's going to be, I would call it, there's going to be 3 or 4 ceramic non-sculpture. So pottery, there'll probably be 3 or 4 examples of cutting edge pottery, and there'll be 3 or 4 photographs out of the 100, maybe that many. There'll be some mixed media type things. There'll be probably 50% will be either oil or acrylic painting, and then the other, whatever there is, 30% will be watercolor. So it's a visual group, and sculpture. There's probably 7 or 8 sculptures in the whole show. So of those 100 pieces in the show, maybe 3 are photographs. Now, of the 100 people at the show, 50% don't think photography, fabric art, glass should be there. So let's say 50%. And 50% don't think photography, glass, fabric should be there either. Except for the 3 people who did photography, or the 2 that did fabric art, or the couple of glass blowers. Everybody else thinks it should really be oil painting and watercolor. Just saying. You might disagree, you might think we've come further, but I don't know. I have a Master in Fine Art degree, so I can go on both sides of the fence. And for years, I did art in the park, where you would have a booth, and I sold black and white fine art photographs. So think 8 black and white prints in a darkroom, shot on 8x10 landscapes at Yosemite. Just that's kind of what I was selling. And you know, photography, we use the term black and white fine art. No one in the world uses that except photographers. So there's no one recognizes that word, that phrase, black and white fine art in the art world. It's just fine art. There's no, like, what are you talking about? This black and white landscape? That doesn't get its own category in the real world. So, you know, photography, I think, sadly, is considered right up there at art in the park with potters and people who are making jewelry. That's always good. People who are making little brooch-like things and sticking them on sandals and selling it as fashion. That's kind of where photography is viewed, I think, from the art crowd. Now, you could argue like, oh no, there's photography, there's great photographers, there's famous photographers. Yeah, there's some. There are a couple. I would say there's not a lot of pictures sell for more than 10 grand though. Even by famous photographers, 10 grand's a tough number to hit. Now, you can say, well, on auction, this Ansel Adams sold for like a zillion. Yeah, Ansel Adams sold for a zillion, sure. Doesn't really help the rest of us. I don't think it's, just my views, I think is the best way to say it. Interesting about photography, a camera taken by a famous photographer will outsell a print made by that photographer. So you know, Barnack, they sold his camera for $1 zillion. Different war photographers, they sold their cameras off on auction long after their death for a fortune. If you had a Robert Capa Contax camera that he used on D-Day, I mean, that camera would be far exceed the selling price of the prints. Just saying. You don't see, Picasso's brushes getting sold off for more than his paintings, or Michelangelo's mallet from his sculptures. You don't see that. But photography, and you see the cameras are selling. for more than the artwork. I find that very interesting. So I guess I have a bit of a bias about our view of photography as art. We can say it's art, like it is art. We can say that all we want. Doesn't mean that everyone's on board. Let's just say not everybody's on board with that. That's probably a safe way to say it. Anyways, so I would have some entries in these art shows, and that was kind of where this work ended up. I then put it in the box. I have work prints. As I said, there were hundreds of work prints, and then there was these 40 or so, I would call them fine art gallery prints, and I printed them up and I put them in a box, and I opened that box today. I don't know what your feelings are on these pictures. Maybe you found them interesting. Not sure exactly, not sure exactly why I'm doing this, but these are some photographs that I took of my dad. Kind of started the project in November that year, and by Father's Day we were wrapped up. And I made the prints, showed them to a couple of people. I'm showing them here. I hope you found them interesting. Just saying.